Welcome to another deep dive. We always try to bring you the good stuff, so we're really excited about today's topic. We're diving into Jacob Boehme's The Incarnation of Jesus Christ. It can get a little complicated, but we're here to help unpack the big ideas without, getting too lost. So yeah, consider us your guides through all this.
Yeah, that's right. This isn't like a crash course in becoming a Boehme's expert. Like we said, we're just going to try to give you a taste of his most interesting ideas. Boehme really gets into it with the incarnation, what he calls humanity's journey from the beginning, and the concept of redemption. But we'll try to keep it simple. Plus, we'll explore his unique perspective on spiritual awakening. We're sticking to the text he wrote, which is broken down into three parts. First, how the Word became man. Second, what Christ's suffering really means. And third, his view of the Christian life as a path to spiritual growth.
So we're not going to try to cover everything Boehme ever wrote in one episode. Let's start by looking at Boehme's ideas about reality. Like, what are those basic principles that were around even before the creation of the world as we know it?
Sounds good.
He talks about two fundamental forces, almost like these primal energies. You have this fiery realm that's all about desire and darkness, and then you've got this completely opposite realm of light.
Right.
What's really interesting is how he describes the fire at the beginning.
Yeah.
He's saying it was kind of contained within God's gentleness, like a potential energy that hadn't quite ignited yet.
Right. What I think is fascinating is how Boehme sees these forces. Like, they're not just fighting each other from the start. The light is actually inside the fire from the get-go.
Oh, I see.
It's not like some separate thing trying to put out the fire. It's like a built-in part of it.
That's really different from how we usually think about it.
Right. This back and forth, this tension is super important because it sets the stage for how he explains the whole good versus evil thing in creation later on.
Got it. So then along comes this third principle, as he calls it, something that was hidden within God, specifically God the Father. It gets revealed through what he calls holy magic, which I guess we can understand as God's wisdom in action.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
He talks about it as this mysterium, right? Like this primal chaos that's just full of possibility, but nothing's really taken shape yet. It has the potential for everything that will eventually exist.
Right. It's like, if you think of it, the mysterium is like this uncarved block of marble. It could become a masterpiece, but it's not one yet, right? Boehme really emphasizes that this wasn't a direct image of God, but more like the wisdom of God. It became the space, the place where the Spirit of God could actually exist.
Okay.
And the image he uses is really cool. He says that wisdom is like a virgin. It reflects the divine nature without being the one that creates it, kind of like how a mirror reflects light.
So from this great mystery, or mysterium as he calls it, the entire universe gets created. Angels, humans, everything.
Right.
And Boehme makes this really thought-provoking point that God, at first, didn't have a direct likeness of himself out there in existence.
That's an interesting idea.
He says there was this longing within God's wisdom, this divine will that led to everything becoming real through desire.
Right.
But here's the catch. The pure light of God stays the same through all of this. It's unchanging.
Yeah, and this is where we get into Boehme's take on how God does stuff. It's not like God himself transforms when he creates, but rather it's his eternal wisdom that acts as the blueprint, the image that creation follows. And he's specific about this. Angels, humans, even the forces he associates with wrath.
Yeah.
Their patterns were always there in God's wisdom, like thoughts in our minds.
Yeah.
Present, but not yet real, not yet out there in the world.
So now let's move on to humanity's creation and the whole story of the fall from grace.
Okay.
Boehme tells us we were made with all three of these principles, right? Our spirit is threefold, and this is where he uses that term triple fiat. It's like three divine acts of creation that breathe life into us. He portrays Adam as a whole being with both masculine and feminine qualities and places him in paradise.
Yeah, and this starting point for Adam is crucial for Boehme. He calls Adam the right and holy image. Adam perfectly reflects the Holy Trinity. But here's the thing. This perfect image then turns its attention to earthly matters.
Uh-oh.
And that distorts the divine likeness, making Adam lose what Boehme calls paradisiacal sight, which is this clear perception of the divine, like you're seeing it without anything blocking the view.
Oh, so the view gets blocked.
Yeah, it gets blocked. And because of this internal shift, paradise itself becomes hidden, leaving humanity vulnerable to the elements and all the influences of the universe.
So then we get to the creation of woman.
Right.
Boehme doesn't see this as a totally separate creation event.
Yeah.
It's more like a division within Adam that separates these two tinctures, fire and water, which together make up the soul and spirit. But after the fall, everything changes.
Right.
Humanity changes. They become more like animals, focused on physical stuff, and the direct connection to heaven and the divine becomes a distant memory, something mysterious and unknown.
And what's important to remember here is that Boehme believes the pure soul is still there inside of us, but now it's covered up. He uses the term earthly garment. It's like our divine nature is hidden, stained by all these desires and messed up ideas we have. This separation from our original state, it's the main problem that Boehme says made it absolutely necessary for God to become human.
Okay, so the temptation plays a huge part in all of this too, right?
Of course.
Boehme explains that Adam's own nature, what he calls matrix naturae, the foundation of who he is, basically presented him with everything he desired after the demonic influence got to him. God specifically said, don't touch this fruit, the fruit that represents the mixture of the earthly realm. But Boehme says Adam wanted God's power for himself. This leads to this internal battle, a war between the flesh and the spirit.
Yes, exactly. For Boehme, disobeying God wasn't just about eating some fruit. It was about this fundamental shift in the will, this desire to take divine power and make a separate existence that revolves around the self. This rebellion had big consequences, like losing paradise and the divine image getting all messed up.
And this brings us to Boehme's core idea, the incarnation of Christ. He's very clear that this wasn't some small event or an afterthought. It was absolutely necessary because of how far humanity had fallen.
Exactly. Boehme describes Christ as the second Adam, the perfect virgin image that shows the Holy Trinity, something the fallen Adam couldn't produce from within himself. That's why God had to directly intervene to fix what was broken,
So how does this fixing happen? Boehme talks about God entering the half-dead image of Mary with the same pure form that Adam should have used to become fruitful. It's the Word, the divine logos, becoming flesh in her through what he calls the centrum naturae, which draws from the essence of the Father and of Mary. It's this idea of divine life bursting out from almost death.
Yeah, and what's striking is Boehme's insistence that Christ wasn't just human in the physical world, but also within God himself and within Mary. Like, he covered all three of those fundamental principles. Christ took on the form of a servant on purpose to defeat death and the devil and take back that position of authority that Lucifer lost.
Boehme gives specific reasons why Christ had to become human.
Yeah.
First, to be the rightful ruler of the material world. Second, to be a real, tangible embodiment of the Son of God. Third, to calm the Father's divine wrath, like a mediator. And fourth, to be the Son of Man for real, sharing in our human essence.
And then he talks about Mary's role in all of this.
Right.
He makes it clear that Mary, just like Christ through her, had human nature. Christ received his soul from her essence, not from any male seed. Boehme says this brought back that original human potential, that spark within God's principle. He says Mary was given the highest heavenly purity and was raised up because of it.
But Boehme makes sure to point out that this wasn't because Mary had some special power of her own. It was all because of God's grace and power.
Right.
He says that from the very beginning, the goal was for the word of life to become real. So while Mary is blessed, she's not a goddess to be worshipped.
Right.
The focus is on the word of life that lives in the Father. That's the source of true rebirth.
And this leads us to how we as believers connect with Christ. Boehme says it's through true faith and a deep longing in our souls, by experiencing Christ's death and resurrection within ourselves, that we can thrive in the divine essentiality. He makes a point that Christ's soul and flesh have the very essence of God in them, and that when Christ died, he left behind earthly existence and went into that divine essentiality, and that's a possibility for us too.
So how do we apply these big theological ideas to our everyday lives? Boehme explores spiritual rebirth and what it means to be a true Christian. He says true faith isn't just about agreeing with ideas, it's a living force, like a fire burning inside us that fills us up without being contained.
Right.
He warns us that relying too much on logic can actually trap faith, leading to inner conflict. True freedom comes when faith puts God's will into action through love.
Boehme really focuses on faith being this active, vibrant thing. It's way different from just understanding something intellectually. He emphasizes that we need a new birth, which happens through water and the Holy Spirit. It's like this dynamic shift in our will that challenges the limits of our rational minds. Boehme says that our stubborn, selfish will, the one driven by reason, needs to die, in a sense, and give in to God's mercy.
He also talks about how our external life, all our attachments to logic and worldly desires, can be like this wall that blocks the inner image of God. He acknowledges that we have to take care of our physical needs, but he warns against getting too focused on external things because it can blind us spiritually.
Right.
He says that when we help others, when we do acts of charity, it brings spiritual blessings that connect us to that mysterium again.
Boehme doesn't sugarcoat it when he talks about people who don't believe. He says they're stuck in their earthly nature and they don't even want to understand God's mysteries. He believes they willingly fall into negativity because of their pride and self-importance.
Yeah, he doesn't make spiritual awakening sound easy either. He says that to get into God's kingdom, we often have to deal with persecution, go through tough times, endure trials, and be okay with people looking down on us.
Yeah.
Because, in his view, these negative spiritual forces have a lot of power in this world.
He describes this inner battle as two worlds inside of us. One that's all about negativity and destruction, and the other that's about freedom and love. Death, in his view, is the ultimate separator between these two. He says Christ came to earth specifically to lead us away from that negativity and towards a life of light and love.
I like that visual he uses, our outer life being like a reflection of our inner state.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But he warns that we shouldn't let our desires get fixated on material things or worldly achievements.
Right.
He believes that distorts our inner divine image.
Boehme describes the path of a true Christian as one that's hard work, full of constant struggle against selfish desires. It's a dying to our old selfish selves, the Adam inside of us, and then rising with Christ. He specifically calls out luxuria, which is this excessive attachment to pleasures and possessions.
Right.
He says it corrupts us by making us obsessed with the fleeting and superficial things.
So what does Boehme see as the big purpose behind all of creation? He suggests that the divine essence itself wants a mirror, a way to see itself reflected back. He says our world, with its mix of good and bad, allows for a physical manifestation of nature's wonders, something he thinks is different from the angelic realm.
He talks about this tree of faith growing in God's paradise, something our logical minds can't grasp, but the noble image within our spirit can. He warns that anyone who truly follows God's path is going to face hardship and ridicule.
Boehme makes it clear that becoming a child of God is much more than just believing certain things. It takes a total transformation, a rebirth in God through Christ. This leads to a true spiritual sonship or daughtership and all the good that comes with it.
He ends by emphasizing this constant battle against our desires, things like greed and pride. He says that true followers of God are ready for temptations and hardships, willing to break free from their limited understanding and surrender to God completely.
Wow.
And he leaves us with this idea of the regenerated person, a new creation within the old, with a divine essence, a spiritual body, and a connection to Christ's Spirit, which becomes the Holy Spirit living within us. Ultimately, our goal, according to Boehme, is to align ourselves with God's light and love, to let that divine essence be our life.
This has been a really intense deep dive into Jacob Boehme's world. I hope you, as our listener, can see the unique perspective he offers on these big questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Questions about our existence, our struggles, and the possibility of redemption. He really makes us think deeply about these things.
I think it's worth taking some time to really think about these ideas. The back and forth between our inner and outer lives, the constant tension between what we desire and our potential for a connection with God, and how powerful true spiritual rebirth can be.
So here's something to think about. How could understanding Boehme's perspective, even though it can be difficult, affect your own search for knowledge and meaning in your life? This deep dive is just the beginning of a much bigger exploration. Keep asking questions and keep learning. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.